The neighborhood basketball court was alive with the sound of sneakers on concrete and the sharp clang of a loose hoop. On one side, three boys had cornered a younger kid, pushing him back against the fence. The kid clutched his shoes tightly, his eyes wide with fear as one of the boys barked, "Take them off." Now, sitting on a nearby bench, the protagonist watched silently, one leg crossed over the other. His gaze, calm and unblinking, followed their every move. When the kid didn't respond fast enough, one boy yanked at his collar, making him stumble. That was enough. The protagonist stood and walked toward them, his steps deliberate. The tallest of the three noticed him first and scoffed, "Mind your own business." But the protagonist only stopped a few feet away. His voice was even, almost quiet. "Let him go," the leader smirked, shoving the younger kid aside. Or what? In an instant, the protagonist moved. His fist struck the leader squarely in the chest, sending him sprawling. Before the others could react, he kicked the second boy's legs out from under him and grabbed the third by the shirt, shoving him hard into the fence. All three crumpled to the ground, groaning. The younger kid stumbled backward, clutching his shoes to his chest, stunned. The protagonist turned without another word and walked back toward the bench. But as he passed the fallen boys, he caught the leader's glare, a look that lingered, promising this wasn't over. The sun was beginning to set by the time the protagonist left the basketball court. The faint sounds of bouncing balls and chatter faded behind him. He walked down the quiet street. His hands stayed in his pockets, his pace steady. But he didn't need to turn around to know he was being followed. He could hear them, hurried footsteps scraping against the pavement. When he finally stopped at the corner of an alley, the footsteps did too. He turned slowly. It was the same boy from earlier, the one who'd been glaring at him after the fight. But now he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a much bigger figure, his older cousin. The cousin cracked his knuckles and sneered. "So you're the one who thinks he's tough, picking on little kids? Try that with me." The protagonist's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. The boy from earlier stepped forward, emboldened now. "He's the one who embarrassed me. Show him what happens." The cousin smirked and started walking toward the protagonist, his heavy steps echoing in the alley. "You should have stayed on your bench," he said, because now the protagonist moved before he could finish. A sharp step forward and his hand shot out, grabbing the cousin's wrist mid-swing. In one motion, he twisted it behind the man's back, forcing him to bend over in shock. The cousin let out a grunt of pain, but the protagonist didn't stop there. He pivoted, slammed the bigger man's shoulder into the wall, and swept his legs out from under him. The ground shook as the cousin hit the pavement hard, breathless and stunned. The boy froze, eyes wide as he watched his cousin sprawled out on the ground, clutching his ribs and gasping for air. The protagonist straightened, his shirt calm and collected. His cold gaze flicked between the two of them before he turned his back and walked away. Behind him, neither of them dared move or speak, too shaken to do anything but watch as he disappeared into the fading light. The next morning, the protagonist walked into school as though nothing had happened. His hands were in his pockets, his steps quiet yet firm, but the moment he stepped through the gates, he felt it, the weight of countless eyes following him. Whispers rippled through the halls. Groups of students leaned close, exchanging hushed words as he passed. "That's him," someone murmured. "He took out three guys at the court. And then their cousin too. No way, that's just a rumor, right?" The protagonist kept walking, his face unreadable. He moved through the chatter like it didn't exist, his eyes fixed straight ahead. In class, even his teacher paused mid-sentence when she noticed the tension in the room. No one dared sit too close to him. By the time lunch came around, the cafeteria was alive with even louder murmurs. He took his tray, sat at an empty table in the corner, and began eating in silence. That silence didn't last long. A group of older students approached, blocking the light above his table. Their leader slammed his palm against the surface, making the trays nearby rattle. "You think you're better than us?" he sneered, leaning in. "I've heard about you. Why don't you stand up and show me how tough you really are?" The protagonist didn't even lift his head at first. He picked up another bite, chewing slowly, his calm demeanor sharpening the air around him. When he finally looked up, his gaze locked onto the leader's, cold, steady. The boy froze mid-smirk, his confidence cracking under the weight of that silent glare. The other boys shuffled back unconsciously, exchanging uneasy glances. After a long moment, the protagonist returned his attention to his food, as though the group was already gone. The leader swallowed hard, forced a laugh, and muttered, "Forget it," before motioning his friends away. All around, the whispers grew quieter, and though no one dared speak to him, everyone understood some fights didn't even need fists. After the tense lunch confrontation, the rest of the school day passed in uneasy silence. Whispers still followed the protagonist, but no one dared approach him again. When the final bell rang, he left the building without a backward glance, his bag slung carelessly over one shoulder. The streets on his way home felt quieter than usual. Even the faint sound of basketballs in the distance reminded him of the first encounter that had set all this in motion. He flexed his hand absently as he walked, feeling the soreness in his knuckles, a dull ache he didn't mind. When he reached the small apartment, he opened the door to find his mother setting dinner on the table. The warm smell of rice and soup filled the cramped kitchen. She turned and smiled faintly when she saw him, but her eyes quickly narrowed as she caught sight of his hands. "Let me see," she said sharply, stepping closer. The protagonist hesitated, then slowly held out his hands. Faint bruises and small scrapes stood out against his skin. Her smile vanished. "You've been fighting again, haven't you?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly. "I told you, I don't want you coming home like this. Do you want trouble to follow you here?" He stayed quiet, lowering his gaze as she scolded him. Her words cut deeper than any punch he'd taken that week. When she finally stopped, she crossed her arms and waited for an answer. "I'll stop," he said softly, but even as he said it, his eyes drifted to the faint marks still on his knuckles. He curled his fingers slowly, hiding them in his pockets. His mother let out a weary sigh and turned back to the stove. As he sat at the table, watching her shoulders stiff with worrying, he told himself he wouldn't let her know what was really going on. Not yet. Some things, he thought, were better left unspoken. The next morning, the protagonist left the apartment quietly, careful not to wake his mother. The weight of her worried eyes still lingered in his mind as he walked to school. His hands stayed in his pockets, knuckles still faintly sore, but his pace never slowed. When he stepped into the classroom, the usual whispers started up again. Students shifted in their seats, casting quick glances at him before looking away. He ignored them as always and took his seat near the back, resting his chin on his hand. But today, something was different. As the bell rang, the door opened and a new figure stepped inside, a transfer student. The teacher introduced him briefly, but the boy's eyes were already scanning the room. He didn't seem nervous or shy like most newcomers. His gaze stopped when it reached the protagonist. Without asking, the transfer student walked down the aisle and took the empty seat directly behind him. The room fell quiet for a moment, everyone watching, waiting for something to happen. The protagonist didn't turn around, but he could feel the boy's eyes on him. Even as the lesson began, the transfer student leaned back casually, his expression unreadable yet sharp. He didn't bother to hide the way he was watching, as though he already knew who he was sitting behind and why it mattered. The protagonist stayed still, but his shoulders stiffened slightly. He could sense something in the boy's quiet confidence, something that didn't match the others who had challenged him before. During the break, the transfer student tapped a finger on his desk and said just loud enough for the protagonist to hear, "You're exactly like they said." The protagonist didn't respond, but for the first time that morning, he allowed himself the faintest smirk, though he kept it hidden from the rest of the room. The air between them stayed tense, like a cord stretched tight, and it was clear to everyone this was no ordinary classmate. The rest of the day passed, with the transfer student's quiet presence lingering like a shadow behind the protagonist. Even as the final bell rang, the tension between them hadn't broken. Students shuffled out of the classroom in pairs, murmuring about the strange new boy and what would happen next. Protagonist rose slowly, slipping his bag over his shoulder and heading toward his locker, but as he approached, he stopped. The door to his locker hung slightly open, the lock dangling uselessly. Inside, his books were shoved carelessly aside, and the small envelope of lunch money he kept there was gone. For a moment, he stared at it silently, the faint sound of laughter carrying down the hall behind him. His eyes narrowed. Turning, he followed the sound, his footsteps echoing through the now empty corridor. Around the corner, a small group of boys huddled together, snickering, the money folded in one's hand. The group froze when they noticed him, the boy holding the money. Tried to hide it behind his back, but the protagonist was already there. He stopped just a step away from them, his voice low but clear. "Give it back." The thief tried to laugh it off. "What's the big deal? It's just a little." The protagonist reached forward and grabbed the boy by the collar, pulling him close enough that their foreheads nearly touched. "I said," he repeated slower this time, "give it back." The boy's smirk faltered. His hand trembled as he held the money out. But the protagonist didn't take it. "Say it," he demanded. The boy's face flushed as he glanced around at the classmates now gathering to watch. I'm sorry," he muttered louder. "I'm sorry," he shouted this time, his voice cracking. Satisfied, the protagonist released him, letting him stumble back. He plucked the money from the boy's hand, tucking it into his pocket as though nothing had happened. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving the thief standing there, humiliated in front of everyone, and behind him, whispers began again, this time, quieter, sharper, and full of something closer to respect. The next day, the protagonist entered the school to find the whispers louder than ever. What happened at the lockers had already traveled through every hallway. His name was no longer just a rumor, it was a challenge. By the time he stepped into the gym for physical education, the atmosphere had changed. Older students leaned against the walls, arms crossed, watching him closely. Their stares carried more than curiosity now. They carried intent. The coach called everyone to line up. But before the exercises could begin, one of the older boys stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Let's see if you're as tough." As they say, the protagonist's expression didn't change. He dropped his bag quietly and walked to the center of the mat without a word. The boy charged first, his confidence showing in every step. But it lasted only seconds. The protagonist shifted, dodged, and with a sharp twist, sent him sprawling onto the floor. Gasps echoed through the gym. Another boy stepped forward immediately, refusing to let it end there. He lunged, swinging wide, but the protagonist caught his arm mid-strike, pivoted, and slammed him to the mat even harder than the first. One by one, more came, 3 more boys, each older and larger than the last. Each time, the protagonist moved like water, efficient, unshaken, and each of them fell faster than the one before. When the last one hit the floor, the room went silent, silent. The protagonist adjusted his sleeve and stepped back, breathing steady, his eyes sweeping over the onlookers. None of them dared move now. Even the coach stood speechless for a moment before clearing his throat and awkwardly calling the class to continue. As the others returned to their lines, they kept stealing glances at him, some full of fear, others of quiet respect, and, from the corner of the room, the transfer student watched with a faint, knowing smirk, as though this was exactly what he'd expected all along. After the gym confrontation, the whispers at school shifted. No longer just rumors, his reputation now carried weight. Even teachers seemed hesitant to call on him, and the transfer students' quiet smirk lingered like a question yet to be answered. When the final bell rang, the protagonist walked home as usual, cutting through narrow alleys and quiet streets. His body still carried faint soreness from the gym, but his pace never faltered. The sun was already low when he reached his neighborhood. The familiar row of buildings stood under a fading orange sky. He turned the corner toward his apartment building and stopped. A sleek black car was parked across the street. Its windows were tinted so dark they reflected nothing but the dying light. He didn't look at it directly, though he felt the weight of unseen eyes on him. He adjusted his bag strap and continued walking, his expression calm. In the reflection of a shop window, he glanced at the car again. The engine idled softly, a faint hum beneath the quiet evening air. He noted the license plate, memorized it. When he reached his building, he slowed just enough to catch the faint movement inside the car, a figure shifting in the driver's seat, a phone pressed to their ear. The protagonist climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator, his steps quiet but deliberate. From his window, he could still see the car. It hadn't moved. He sat at his desk and stared down at his hands, the faint bruises fading into his skin. His mind replayed the day, the fights, the transfer students' knowing gaze, and now this. He didn't need to wonder long. Trouble he thought was already here. And it wasn't going to wait. The night passed quietly, but the memory of the black car lingered in the protagonist's thoughts. Even as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he replayed the faint movement inside the vehicle, the driver's shadowed face, and the hum of its idling engine. When morning came, he dressed as usual and left the apartment before his mother woke. The streets felt colder today. Though the sun was out, at school, the whispers continued. He walked through them unfazed, his eyes steady as students parted to let him pass. By the time he reached his locker, the hallway had emptied. He knelt to open it, only to find something new waiting for him. A single folded piece of paper slipped out of the slats and landed at his feet. He picked it up without hesitation and unfolded it. In sharp, messy letters, it read, "You're dead after school." For a moment, he stared at the words, his face unreadable. Then slowly, he crumpled the note in his fist, the paper crackling softly. He tucked it into his pocket as if it were nothing more than trash and closed the locker door with a quiet click. Behind him, faint laughter echoed down the hallway, distant but intentional enough for him to hear. He didn't turn around. Instead, he straightened, adjusted his bag, and continued toward class. The protagonist already knew what this meant. He had seen it coming since the gym, since the transfer student appeared, and certainly since the black car. And if they thought this note would rattle him, they were wrong. If anything, it only confirmed what he had been preparing for all along. The real fight hadn't even started yet. The rest of the day moved slowly, each class thick with tension. Whispers followed the protagonist wherever he went, though no one dared meet his eyes. He could feel it building, the stares in the cafeteria, the faint sound of snickering when he passed, the way students shifted out of his path yet kept watching from behind. The note in his pocket felt heavier with every step. When the final bell rang, he didn't rush to leave. Instead, he took his time gathering his things, letting the room empty before he stood and walked out. He already knew where they would be waiting. The corridor outside the gym was quiet. Late afternoon light filtered through narrow windows, casting long shadows on the floor. As he turned the corner behind the gym, they appeared, 5 of them. They blocked the path, spread out just enough to cut off escape. The one in the middle, taller, broader, stepped forward and cracked his knuckles. "You were warned," he said with a smirk. "You should have kept your head down." The protagonist dropped his bag to the ground, his expression calm, his hands loosening at his sides. The first boy lunged. In a blur, the protagonist sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and slammed him shoulder first into the wall. The boy crumpled instantly. The second came in swinging wild. The protagonist ducked under the punch, rose, and drove his fist into the boy's stomach, folding him to the floor. The next had tried at once, but he moved faster, twisting one by the collar and tossing him into the other. Both hit the ground. Hard, groaning, only one remained now, the leader. For the first time, his smirk faltered. The protagonist stepped closer,